There's so much to share in the what of UDL, the how of UDL, and the why of UDL. In this presentation, I want to focus on the why. Why should instructors, teachers, staff get involved in implementing UDL? I think one way to answer that might be to focus on the idea of averages and this myth of the normal average student that honestly, systematically, and systemically, we've really come to idealize. I mean this in terms of normal students based on how they learn, how fast they learn, how they express their learning, and what motivates and sustains them. For example, in a given classroom, I might have a static way of doing things. Maybe I lecture a lot, or use a lot of small group work, or independent seat work. And I find that for my normal students, my average students, the students that I expect to have, they do just fine with that. And I know there are some that don't do as well or struggle with that material, and the problem seems to be with them. We also look at this in terms of how fast they learn. If a student is too slow, we tend to put them into a diagnostic system and try to figure out what's wrong with them that causes them to not be able to learn this material as fast as their normal colleagues. But having students that are too fast can also be problematic, as they always want to get ahead, and I'm just trying to teach this class at a nice, normal pace. We also have this in terms of how they express their learning. So, for example, we expect students in all the way through K-12 and into higher ed to be really good at being able to demonstrate their knowledge on multiple choice tests, using essays, or developing presentations. And if they're not good at those, well, that's a problem. And finally, in terms of motivation, we expect that students will be motivated by grades, and if not, at least by compliance. And we have issues, again, when students deviate from that. So ideally, we like to think that our students are all hovering into this area, where in terms of those four things, they really just are very similar. And as our classes grow, we get 10, 15, 20, 30 students in there, or in a large lecture hall at a university, 100, 300, we hope that they're all clustered as close to the middle as we can. Unfortunately, they're not. We know from research in neuroscience and education science and social sciences that people are really different in terms of how they learn. For example, one of the four. So you might find a student who says, you know what, I learn content pretty well with lecture and note-taking. And in the same class, you might find a student saying, I find it really hard to focus in lectures, and I can't take notes at the same time. I need time to talk about new information. Or you've got the student who feels like, this is boring. I already know this stuff, and I want to do something with it, not just listen to a lecture about it. So that's just one of the four. They're also going to vary in how fast they learn, how they express their learning, what motivates and sustains them. The effect is that, holistically, we're suggesting that the more average our students are, the better. And even though we might not say it that way, it's actually the way that our system is designed. There are two problems with this. Number one, none of our students are actually average. And two, we don't really want them to be. So how can UDL help? Well, now we're back to that question. Why implement UDL? What UDL does is it takes this systemic focus on the average and it moves it to focusing on the extremes, focusing on what could I do to provide flexibility, to provide options, to provide methods and content in such a way that students who need this extreme or that extreme can both succeed. And in the process, we find that all of the students in between those extremes can grow together and rise together in excellent performance. UDL leads to more rigorous outcomes achievable by more students with lifelong implications for learning. In this framework, we don't just teach our content, we teach our students how to learn, how to be the best learner that they can be independently. Another way to think about this is to get rid of the whole idea of average altogether. What UDL suggests is that we have a predictable continuum of variance in terms of what motivates and sustains us through challenge, how we recognize and conceptualize information, and how we plan, perform, and express ourselves. Now, ultimately, though we talk about these three brain networks, it's really just one brain. And when we bring them together, this is what it might look like in a standard classroom. I'm going to go with a higher ed classroom in which a professor lectures to her students. She expects the students to take good notes, and she expects them to be motivated by grades or by content interest. Now, this is a limited means of engagement, representation, and action expression. If we talked about variability in the classroom, the students only have a few options. Either they're motivated by content interest and they happen to be able to be good note takers and they can learn in a lecture, or they can still learn in a lecture, they can take good notes and they're motivated by grades, or ideally by both of those. And those are the full extent of the possibilities. If you are outside that box, or those 3 shades of the one box, then realistically you're going to struggle in this class. The further away you are from those particular skill sets and abilities to learn and express your learning, the more difficult you're going to find learning in this context. Or, another way to say it, is we're again hoping that our students are in fact very average. Now, what if we approach this from a UDL perspective, providing multiple means of engagement, representation, action, and expression? So for engagement, I might go ahead and have that grade-based motivation and the content relevance, but also develop some sort of community interaction. The students are going to be doing something with this material, with each other, or with a larger community. I'm going to have my oral lecture, sure, but I'm going to make sure that I represent concepts graphically, and I'm going to have a hands-on activity that's central to the learning as well. Not graded, part of the learning. I will have the students have the opportunity to note take, maybe even doing collaborative note taking, but we'll also chase this up with group discussion and the ability to express your ideas in that way. Now, we might find one student who says, these non-traditional aspects of the classroom are what really allow me to learn. And another student might be like, no, it's the traditional stuff. I do great in lecture halls. I'm fine with that. That's the stuff that helps me learn. Another student might say, well, it's kind of a little of both. In fact, with just those 8 options for representation, expression, and engagement, there are 17 different combinations that students can make of those options to best learn, express their learning, and engage in the learning. This allows them to be predictably variable in those capacities, choosing for themselves what works for them. It lets our students be different and still succeed. So why UDL? Because your students aren't average, and you don't want them to be. UDL lets them thrive in divergence.